Let me read to you a passage from the 21st chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 15 to 19. It's the Gospel for the Vigil of the Feast of St. Peter and St. Paul, June the 28th. St. John writes, "When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' 'Yes, Lord,' he said, 'you know that I love you.' Jesus said, 'Feed my lambs.' Again Jesus said, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' He answered, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' Jesus said, 'Take care of my sheep.' The third time he said to him, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, 'Do you love me?' He said, 'Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you.' Jesus said, 'Feed my sheep. Truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go.' Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, 'Follow me.'" That's from John chapter 21, verse 15 to 19, for the Vigil of the Feast of St. Peter and St. Paul. We are led to think of love for Christ. When we look at the scripture texts for the Feast of St. Peter and St. Paul, the emphasis is weighted towards St. Peter. The Gospel passages for the Vigil and for the day itself both feature Christ's words to Simon Peter. Of course, the feast day itself sets forth the greatness of both apostles, one who was the rock of the church by Christ's appointment, the other an apostle, though not one of the 12. Because of the composition of the New Testament, St. Paul looms large in the church's consciousness. The Acts of the Apostles, mainly about the ministry of St. Paul, but including too the ministry of St. Peter, and the letters of St. Paul, excluding the letter to the Hebrews, constitute not far short of 40% of the New Testament. St. Paul was an extraordinary convert of the risen Jesus. He himself claimed to have worked harder than any of the other apostles, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 10, although one surely would not have to take this absolutely literally because, well, how would St. Paul himself have known? For example, it is virtually established by immemorial tradition that Thomas the Apostle reached India and was martyred there, buried, it seems, at Milapur on the Coromandel coast of India. His relics were later translated to Edessa. But how hard Thomas must have worked! What would Paul have known of the activities of that apostle at the end of the world? Indeed, the thought of the zeal of St. Paul ought lead us to remember the zeal of the other apostles. Nicephorus, relying upon early writers, states that St. Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, preached in Cappadocia, Galatia, and Bithynia, and then in the land of the Scythian deserts, and afterwards in Byzantium itself, and finally in Thrace, Macedonia, Thessaly, and Achaia. It is generally agreed that he was crucified by order of the Roman governor at Patras in Achaia, Greece. So let the thought of Peter and Paul remind us of the love for Christ that consumed them all. Yes, indeed, the love of Christ. If there is one thing we are reminded of in our Gospel text for the Vigil of St. Peter and St. Paul, John chapter 21, verse 15 to 19, it is the love of Christ. This love is what Christ expected of Peter, whom he appointed as shepherd of his sheep, and which the inspired author of this chapter seems to suggest that Peter gave to him in abundance. The fourth Gospel ends with the figures of Christ and Peter. Christ asking for Peter's love and Peter giving it. As we read, the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Christ had come to establish on earth the promised kingdom of heaven. Essentially, entry into this kingdom involves entry into union with Jesus Christ by faith and baptism. And the heart of this, the Christian life, is a personal love for him, the Master. As St. Paul wrote, "Christ loved me and gave himself up for me," and so Paul loved Christ in return. It was this love for himself that Christ expected as the foundation of discipleship and as the driving source of sharing in his mission. The Gospel of St. Matthew ends with Christ's commission of his disciples to go to the whole world to make disciples of all the nations. Matthew chapter 28, verse 19. The basis of this worldwide and divinely instituted project was faith in Jesus, working in and through love for him. Galatians chapter 5, verse 6. We are reminded of many things in the vigil of this feast, such as the apostolic foundation of the church and the necessary role of the church in bringing Christ to the world. But especially clear is the basis of it all, love for the Master, so evident in today's Gospel that I read. It is this which transformed the lives of both Peter and Paul, and which drove them in their life of bringing Jesus Christ to the world of their time. Let us then on this day think of the person of Jesus Christ, the heart and soul of the Christian religion, and the apex of the religions of mankind. In the plan of God, the religious instinct and yearning of man for God is answered from heaven with the gift of Jesus Christ. He is God's answer to the religions of man, whether man knows it or not. "No one comes to the Father but by me," he told his disciples. As Peter said before the Sanhedrin, "There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved." Acts chapter 4, verse 12. It is a ringing declaration, and we must all make that declaration to the world of our everyday lives and beyond.